Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week's video. This week I'll be showing you how I made this Outback desert themed ant terrarium, and that includes making the tank. I've not got too much else to say about it, apart from that I really enjoyed making this build, although there were a lot of ups and downs, so let's get straight into it. The first thing I need to do is address the tank that I'll be using. Currently, it's a rimmed tank that measures approximately 40 cm long, 25 cm deep, and 30 cm high. This equates to roughly 30 litres. As I hinted at earlier, I'll be remaking this tank as I don't want it to be rimmed. This might seem like a daunting task, but in truth it's not too bad. I began by removing as many of the supports as I could by simply pulling them off. I sliced through the silicone seam on the top support so that it could be leveraged off. This was repeated for the bottom. Now came the time to take it all apart. I cut through the silicone seams on one pane with a sharp razor blade. It could be pulled away, and I cut through the remaining silicone. I put it to one side for the time being. I repeated this for all the pieces of glass. I took my time to make sure I didn't crack any pieces. It was pretty uneventful though, so I skipped through now. I was left with 5 pieces of glass. To be able to silicone them back together, I'd need to clean off old silicone first. I did this in a 2-step process. Firstly, I removed the bulk of the silicone with a razor scraper. I again took my time to make sure I didn't chip any of the edges. Even when the bulk had been removed, there were still bits that the razor struggled to get. So far, the best method I've found is to use a small amount of WD-40, which helps break down the silicone, making it easy to remove with a razor and cloth. If you've got a better method, then please let me know. You can quite clearly see the difference here between parts I have and haven't cleaned. I'll again skip through this fairly quickly, as it was quite a boring but necessary process. Well, that took a very long time. I was cleaning it all up for about 5 hours, but it was well worth the effort. Now all I need to do is silicone it back all together, so I'll show you how I do that now. I laid out the base and 2 of the sides to begin with. I taped the edges off. I'll show you why shortly. I applied a bead of silicone between the base and the side. I used the other paint to hold it into place. I proceeded to apply silicone on all the connections. I smoothed it all out with my finger. I repeated this for the other 2 sides. At this point the tape could be removed. By taping off the edges, you're left with nice clean beads that are quite presentable. It's important to do this before the silicone cures, otherwise it won't have the desired effect. I let it cure overnight. The next day the tape on the corners could be removed as it had done its job. Off camera, I tested for leaks, and there was a small one in one of the corners. Not to worry though, I simply applied a small dollop into this corner and spread it around. After this cured, it was watertight so I could move on to the next step. My original plan for this was to be able to observe the ants nesting. To accomplish this I would use white tongue bricks. As you saw from the thumbnail, I don't actually end up going with this, but it's part of the process, so I think it's good practice to show it anyway. I laid out a few slabs until I had an orientation that I was pleased with. I then spent a while sketching a few designs onto the paper that I'd cut to the same size. They were carefully cut out with a blade. I taped the stencil, if you can call it that, down. I outlined all the passages and chambers with a pencil. This will make it easy to know where to carve. When I'm carving white tongue, I like to have a few different screwdrivers to hand, as they're all useful in different situations. I indented the outline of the design into the brick. This helps prevent chip out and keeps the carving neater. I kept carving until things were looking how I imagined. Along the way I used a screwdriver to create an entrance to each of the nests. In the end, this is what I was left with. A nice coat of paint would really elevate these designs to the next level. I tend to use acrylic paint that I've watered down so that the white tongue absorbs it. I painted the parts that would be exposed, but left the nest itself unpainted as the ants stand out really well against white tongue. These are the finished nests. I think they look quite nice. Anyway, it's time to create the ants' terrarium. To create a level surface, I placed a piece of melamine that I'd cut to size in the centre and filled the sides in with Outback sand. I added the nests in, using sand to make sure all the voids were filled. It's time to dress the big hole in the centre. I'll be filling it with styrofoam to save materials. I filled in the remaining space with sand. A few nests had a small gap between them and the glass, so I filled it in with terracotta clay. Another plank of melamine was added, and I built up the nest entrances with clay. It was all topped off with sand. It was at this point that I was realising that I wasn't that pleased with the build. It was very frustrating as I'd already done so much. I left it for a while, and when I came back I knew that I just had to change it. At this point I even considered releasing the colony, as nothing I seemed to make for them worked for me, but I'm so glad I decided to give it one last shot, because I'm so happy with what I ended up with. I took down everything I'd done up to this point, keeping the materials that could be reused. I gave the tank a thorough clean and I was back to square one. But I had a new idea that I thought should work for both me and the ants. I started by adding a neoprene mat underneath to help keep the tank level. I cut it to size with scissors. I decided to create a natural setup for these ants. Although it's not the environment they're usually from, it still suits their needs. To begin with, I added a small drainage layer of white gravel. As usual, I covered it with geotextile fabric to keep it separate. Time for substrate. I'm using my own custom mix. Although it seems like much less, there's actually more soil in this setup due to it being much larger. I played around with a few different types of rock to see what would look good. I was struggling to visualise my idea properly though, as I was going to use Outback sand again. To see what would look best, I filled a small container with sand and played around with different rocks. In the end, I ended up settling on the lighter rock with bogwood. I have no clue what the type of stone it is, as I dug it up in my area last summer. With this established, I moved back to the tank. It didn't take me very long to settle on a hardscape here. Before planting, I decided to cap off all the soil with sand, as it would give me a better sense of where things should go. Instantly it was transformed. Although I'd most likely have to top off the soil again in some places after the planting was complete. The sand is also a bit damp, so it will lighten up when it dries and look even better. I don't know the exact species of the plants I used, but I'll give you my best guesses. It also doesn't help that I borrowed most of these plants from my mum and sister. It's not like I'm planning to give them back either. I began with two Haworthias kind of in the middle of the background. They're fairly large and provide a nice contrast to the sand. Their white stripes complement the rock nicely. I had some small pink succulents lying around, so I used them as details. I added them with tweezers around the rocks. I love the extra colour that they bring in. To add height and a sense of scale, I'll be using some of my sister's prickly pear cacti. The largest was added in the furthest corner from which it will be observed. Another was planted just next to it. To unite the sides and balance them out a bit, I added a third in the mid-ground to the left. This variation in both positioning and height makes it more pleasing to look at and makes it seem more natural. Now for the only plants I'll use that are actually mine. Some mini cacti. 2 were planted in the mid-ground to complement and fill voids. I'll add a third shortly. I recapped the soil in places where it was necessary. I added a piece of bogwood onto the stone on the right to add texture. I decided the sand in the foreground needed more variation, so I got some small chips of rock and scattered it around, keeping it closer to the main cliff. I also added a smaller pillar in the very centre, and I've got to say I just love how it looks. Originally I wasn't planning on using a dedicated light for this build because I wanted to save some money, but I tested out the light from my Weaver ant tank and I knew I had to get one for it. It makes everything look so much more vibrant. It's time to finally get ready for the ants. I added a layer of flue onto the rim to prevent any ants from being able to crawl out. Once dry, it's super slippery for them. With this done, I moved on to dealing with their old terrarium. I removed all the wood and then the plants. I'll repot them for use in another project. I began to scoop out substrate, sifting through it to make sure no ants were removed accidentally. After a while of removing the substrate, I began to get a bit worried. I'd moved quite a lot and only seen 1 or 2 ants. Perhaps they had to die out, or all somehow escaped. But fortunately, when all hope seemed lost, I moved a last pile of soil to the side and the colony emerged. Unfortunately, later that day, ants began to escape. I must have accidentally broken the flue-on barrier whilst removing things. Luckily, I spotted this when it happened and spent a while collecting them and caught them all in this plastic container. I tipped them into their new space. They darted into the cover. I left them for about 10 minutes to get some food, and when I came back they'd already begun construction on a nest just below one of the Haworthias. Look at them carrying out substrate. During this period, I didn't disturb them as they're quite exposed here. It's been a few days since the last clips, and the ants have been busy. They've got 2 small nests on either side, although I think these are abandoned now. They have got 1 big nest in the very centre, and just look at all that soil they've excavated. I can't believe how much they've done in such a short space of time. I can't wait to see what else they do with it as well. I might remove some of the soil, but for the time being I'm happy with how it's looking, so I'll leave them to it. I'll leave you with some final clips. And that's all from me for this video, but I hope you enjoyed and let me know what you thought down in the comments below. So I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for watching.